How did a fake relationship with a stranger turn into real love? The envelope arrived on a Friday morning with my name typed across expensive letterhead. Inside, a check for $50,000 and a letter that began, Miss Delacroix, your services are required for 6 months. The arrangement is strictly professional. I read it twice before the absurdity hit me. Someone was offering me more money than I'd made in 2 years to pretend to be their girlfriend. The letter was signed by Thea Blackwood, a name I recognized from business magazines and society pages. Tech heiress, venture capitalist, the kind of woman who appeared at charity galas with perfect makeup and calculated smiles. According to the letter, she needed a fake girlfriend to satisfy the terms of her grandfather's will. If she remained single past her 30th birthday, her inheritance would go to a cousin who'd already threatened to dismantle the family foundation. The birthday was in 6 months. The performance had to be convincing. The money was real. I should have thrown the letter away, should have deposited the check and disappeared. Instead, I found myself standing outside Blackwood Industries at exactly 2 p.m., wearing my one good dress and questioning every life choice that had led me here. The receptionist directed me to the penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. Thea Blackwood sat behind a glass desk, her dark hair pulled back severely, her expression unreadable. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, intimidating, completely out of my league. Miss Delacroix, she said without looking up from her computer. Thank you for coming. Her voice carried the kind of authority that made people jump to attention. I'd been in the room 30 seconds and already felt like I was failing some test I didn't understand. She finally looked at me, her gaze traveling from my discount store dress to my nervous fidgeting with calculating assessment. Before we begin, she said, I need to know why you're here. This isn't a dating service. This isn't about loneliness or companionship. This is a business arrangement with specific parameters and expectations. If you're looking for romance or genuine connection, you're wasting both our time. I thought about my student loans, my overdue rent, the job rejection letters stacked on my kitchen counter. I'm here for the money, I said honestly. She smiled for the first time, and it transformed her entire face. Good. Honesty is essential for this to work. My grandfather's will requires me to be in a stable, committed relationship by my 30th birthday. The foundation that bears our family name hangs in the balance, along with the livelihoods of 3,000 employees and the charitable work we fund. She stood and walked to the windows, her heels clicking against the marble floor. My cousin Victor has been systematically undermining the foundation's work, waiting for his chance to inherit and liquidate everything our family built. The scope of what she was asking hit me then. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about preserving something that mattered to thousands of people. Why me? I asked. Why not hire a professional actress or someone from your social circle? Thea turned back to me. Because you're not part of my world. You don't have connections to exploit or secrets to sell. Your financial situation makes you motivated but not greedy. $50,000 is life-changing for you but not enough to retire on. You'll need to maintain the facade for the full 6 months. She returned to her desk and pulled out a contract thicker than most novels. The terms are simple. You'll attend social functions as my girlfriend. You'll be photographed together at appropriate venues. You'll learn enough about my life and interests to be convincing in conversation. In exchange, you'll receive $50,000, a clothing allowance, and accommodations in my penthouse. I stared at the contract, my hands trembling slightly. There are rules, she continued. No romantic involvement with other people during the contract period. No disclosure of our arrangement to anyone. No emotional attachment. She emphasized those last words. This is performance art, not a relationship. The moment you forget that distinction, you become a liability. I signed the contract before I could change my mind. The ink was still wet when she handed me a credit card. Your clothing allowance. We need to make you look like someone I would actually date. Her tone was clinical, but something about the way she said it stung. What's wrong with how I look? I asked. Nothing that money can't fix, she replied, already turning back to her computer. Miranda, my personal shopper, will meet you tomorrow at Bergdorf's. Try not to embarrass yourself. I left her office feeling like I'd been simultaneously rescued and insulted. $50,000 would solve every financial problem I had, but Thea Blackwood's dismissive attitude made me wonder what I'd gotten myself into. The transformation began immediately. Miranda, the personal shopper, was a tiny woman with sharp eyes who could spot bargain bin fabric from across a room. She outfitted me in designer dresses, tailored blazers, and shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. Miss Blackwood has specific tastes, Miranda explained while adjusting a sleeve. Clean lines, classic cuts, nothing too flashy or attention-seeking. You're meant to compliment her, not compete. I hardly recognized myself in the fitting room mirrors. The clothes changed how I moved, how I held myself. When I walked into Thea's office the next day wearing a silk blouse and perfectly fitted slacks, she actually paused in her typing. Better, she said simply. We have our first event tomorrow night, a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. You'll need to know the basics of art history, wine, and small talk. I've prepared some materials. She handed me a folder thick with information about her family, her business interests, her supposed preferences in music and literature. That first gala was a baptism by fire. The Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall had been transformed into an elegant dinner space, with hundreds of New York's elite circulating between cocktail tables and auction displays. Thea appeared at my side exactly as the photographers began their rounds, slipping her arm through mine with practiced ease. "Remember," she whispered, "we've been dating for 8 months. We met at a gallery opening in Soho. You work in art therapy with children." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly I almost believed it myself. We moved through the crowd like dancers following choreography. Thea would introduce me to prominent donors and business associates, and I would smile and nod and offer carefully prepared anecdotes about my fictional work. She was magnetic in this environment, commanding attention without seeming to try. People deferred to her opinions, laughed at her dry observations, and competed for her approval. Watching her work the room was like witnessing a masterclass in social manipulation. "So you're the one who finally caught Thea's attention," said a silver-haired woman whose jewelry probably cost more than most people's cars. We were beginning to think she was married to her work. I felt Thea's hand tighten almost imperceptibly on my arm. "Charlie keeps me grounded," Thea replied smoothly. "She reminds me there's a world outside of board meetings and profit margins." The ease with which she lied was impressive and slightly terrifying. As the evening progressed, I began to understand the magnitude of what Thea was trying to protect. The Blackwood Foundation funded art programs in underserved schools, supported emerging artists, and provided grants for cultural preservation projects. The people at this gala weren't just wealthy socialites. They were stakeholders in something that mattered. If Victor inherited and dismantled the foundation, all of this work would disappear. I found myself genuinely invested in making our performance believable, not just for the money, but for the hundreds of programs that depended on Thea's inheritance. The real test came when Victor Blackwood approached us near the auction tables. He was handsome in the way that expensive grooming and good genetics could achieve, but there was something cold in his eyes that reminded me of a shark evaluating prey. "Cousin," he said, embracing Thea with obvious insincerity, "and you must be Charlotte. I've heard so much about you." He extended his hand to me, and his grip lingered longer than appropriate. I'm surprised Thea found time for romance. She's always been so focused on work. Some might say obsessed. There was an undercurrent of challenge in his words, a suggestion that our relationship was somehow suspect. Thea's response was perfectly calibrated. "Charlie helps me maintain perspective. The foundation's work is important, but so is having someone to share life with." She looked at me with an expression that seemed genuinely affectionate. "I'm learning to appreciate balance." Victor's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of calculation in his eyes. He was evaluating our performance, looking for cracks in the facade. After the gala, we sat in the back of Thea's car as her driver navigated the late-night traffic. She seemed drained, the confident social butterfly replaced by someone who looked genuinely exhausted. "You did well tonight," she said without looking at me. "Victor is suspicious, but that was expected. He's been challenging every aspect of my life since the will was read." I studied her profile in the passing streetlights. "What happens if he figures out we're not really together?" The question seemed to surprise her. "He won't. We'll be convincing because we have to be. The alternative is unacceptable." Her certainty was absolute, but I noticed she didn't answer my question directly. When we arrived at her penthouse, she disappeared into her home office without another word. I was left alone in the guest suite she'd prepared for me, surrounded by luxury I'd never experienced and wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The clothes, the money, the performance. It all felt like I was living someone else's life. Over the following weeks, we fell into a routine. I would spend mornings researching art and culture, preparing for whatever social event was on Thea's calendar. She would brief me on the guest lists, the key players I needed to impress, the conversational topics I should avoid. We attended gallery openings, charity luncheons, and business dinners with clockwork precision. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, attentive but not clingy, supportive but independent. The media began featuring us in society pages and style magazines. Tech heiress Thea Blackwood and her mysterious girlfriend Charlotte Delacroix became a regular fixture in gossip columns. The attention was flattering and terrifying. I wasn't used to having my photograph taken or my outfits analyzed by fashion bloggers, but Thea seemed to thrive on the visibility, using each public appearance to reinforce the narrative of our relationship while simultaneously promoting the foundation's work. The first crack in our professional arrangement appeared during a quiet Sunday morning in the penthouse. I'd been living there for 6 weeks, and we'd settled into a surprisingly comfortable domestic rhythm. I made coffee while she read financial reports. She would comment on news articles while I worked on the art therapy certification I'd decided to pursue for real. That morning, she looked up from her tablet and said, "You don't have to do that, you know. The art therapy program. It's not part of our agreement." I paused in folding my laundry, clothes she'd bought in a life she'd created for me. "I want to. The more I've learned about it for our story, the more interesting it seems." She studied me with that calculating look I'd grown accustomed to. "You realize this is temporary. In 4 months, when the inheritance is secured, this arrangement ends. You'll return to your real life with enough money to start over anywhere you want." The reminder stung more than it should have. I'd begun to enjoy the comfortable routine we'd established, the way she'd started asking for my opinions on foundation matters, the rare moments when she'd let her guard down. Our relationship began shifting during a foundation board meeting I attended as part of maintaining our couple facade. Thea had mentioned I might be interested in eventually joining the foundation staff, and the board members were curious about my background and ideas. I found myself genuinely passionate about the programs we were discussing: art education initiatives, grants for community centers, support for artists from underrepresented communities. When one board member questioned the effectiveness of art therapy for traumatized children, I launched into a detailed explanation of the research I'd been studying. The room went quiet, and I realized I'd been speaking with an authority and passion that had nothing to do with my fake identity. Thea was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. After the meeting, she walked me to her office without speaking. Finally, she turned to me and said, "That wasn't performance. You actually care about this work." The surprise in her voice was almost insulting. "Did you think I was incapable of caring about anything beyond your money?" She studied me for a long moment. "I think I underestimated you. Most people see the foundation as a tax write-off or a social obligation. You see it as a lifeline for people who need support." Something shifted between us in that moment. The professional distance she'd maintained began to erode, replaced by what felt like genuine respect. She started including me in strategic discussions about foundation priorities, asking for my input on program evaluations and funding decisions. Our evening briefings became actual conversations about art, social justice, and the responsibility that came with inherited wealth. I began to see past her intimidating exterior to someone who carried the weight of enormous expectations and tried to live up to a grandfather's legacy while navigating a family that saw her inheritance as their opportunity. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to remember this was supposed to be temporary, professional, emotionally detached. The facade began to feel less like performance and more like preview of something real. We developed inside jokes, comfortable silences, a rhythm of domestic life that neither of us acknowledged directly. She would leave coffee made exactly how I liked it. I would pick up her dry cleaning without being asked. When she worked late, I would order dinner from her favorite restaurant. When I had nightmares about financial insecurity, she would wordlessly make tea and sit with me until I fell back asleep. These small intimacies were dangerous, I knew. They violated the emotional boundaries she'd established so clearly, but they also felt more genuine than any relationship I'd had before. The woman who emerged during these private moments was funny, thoughtful, surprisingly vulnerable about the pressure she lived under. She worried constantly about living up to her grandfather's expectations, about protecting the foundation from Victor's influence, about whether she was worthy of the trust people placed in her. 3 months into our arrangement, Victor escalated his campaign to undermine Thea's credibility. A gossip columnist known for vicious takedowns published a piece questioning the authenticity of our relationship. Sources close to the family suggested that Thea's sudden romance was suspiciously convenient timing, given the inheritance deadline. The article included unflattering photos and snide commentary about my background, my clothes, my qualifications to be dating someone of Thea's stature. Reading it felt like being dissected in public. Thea found me in the kitchen at 6 a.m., reading the article on my phone with tears of rage in my eyes. "Don't," she said simply, taking the phone from my hands. Victor planted that story. Every word is calculated to make you feel exactly like this. But the damage was done. I felt exposed, humiliated, like everyone we'd fooled was now laughing at the obvious deception. "Maybe they're right," I said. "Maybe this is ridiculous. Look at us. We're from completely different worlds. Of course people are suspicious." Thea's response surprised me. Instead of agreeing with the article's assessment, she became fiercely protective. "Victor is scared because we're convincing. The Foundation's board voted yesterday to expand 3 major programs based partly on your recommendations. He sees his inheritance slipping away and he's lashing out." She sat beside me at the kitchen island. "The only thing ridiculous about this situation is that someone as talented and passionate as you has been convinced she doesn't belong in spaces where she can make a real difference." Her defense of me was so unexpected that I started crying again, but for different reasons. "You don't understand," I said. "I was nobody before this. A failed graduate student working in a coffee shop, drowning in debt, invisible to people like you. This whole life feels like playing dress-up." She reached over and took my hand, the first spontaneous physical contact we'd shared outside of public appearances. "Charlotte, I've watched you transform our foundation's approach to community engagement in 3 months. You've brought perspectives and ideas that my MBA and trust fund never could have provided. This isn't dress-up. This is who you are when given the opportunity to flourish." The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. The professional boundaries became increasingly meaningless as we spent more time together, both in public and private. We began staying up late talking about books, politics, our families, our dreams beyond the immediate crisis of the inheritance. I learned that Thea had never wanted to run the family business, that her passion was teaching and she'd been accepted to graduate school and education before her grandfather's illness changed everything. She learned that I'd grown up in foster care, that I'd never had anyone believe in my potential the way she did, that I'd spent most of my life feeling like I was performing respectability rather than embodying it. These revelations created an intimacy that felt both thrilling and dangerous. We were supposed to be pretending to be in love, But somewhere along the way, the pretending had become secondary to something much more real and terrifying. The shift from fake to real became undeniable during a weekend trip to the family estate in the Hamptons. Thea needed to meet with Foundation board members who were summering nearby, and bringing me reinforced the relationship narrative while giving us access to key donors. The Blackwood estate was overwhelming. Acres of manicured grounds, a house that could have been a museum, staff who treated Thea with the kind of deference reserved for royalty. I felt out of place until she took my hand and said, "I know this is intimidating. It intimidates me too, and I grew up here." We walked through gardens that had been featured in architectural magazines, past sculptures worth more than most people's houses, toward a dock where a yacht waited to take us to dinner with the board members. "This is my grandfather's legacy," she said, gesturing at the opulence surrounding us. "All of this comfort and privilege, but also the responsibility to use it for something meaningful. That's what Victor doesn't understand. He sees assets to be liquidated, not a tradition of stewardship to maintain." That night, after a successful dinner with the board members, we walked along the beach behind the estate. The moon reflected off the water, and the sounds of the dinner party faded behind us. For the first time in months, we were alone together without an agenda, without an audience to perform for, without the pressure of maintaining our facade. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we stopped walking. "After this is over, after you secure the inheritance, what happens to us?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. "The contract expires. You take your money and start whatever life you want. I continue running the foundation and fulfilling my grandfather's expectations." Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "What if I don't want that?" The question hung between us like a challenge. She turned to look at me, and in the moonlight her expression was more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. "Charlotte, we can't confuse performance with reality. What we have here isn't real. It's a construct created to serve a specific purpose." "Isn't it real?" I stepped closer to her. "These conversations we have, the way you defend me, the way we've built something together with the foundation work, that's not performance. That's us." She looked away from me, back toward the water. "It's complicated. The power dynamic, the financial arrangement, the circumstances that brought us together, none of that creates a foundation for something genuine." But even as she said it, I could see the conflict in her body language, the way she leaned slightly toward me despite her words. "What if we could separate this from the contract? What if we could figure out what we actually feel without the money and the arrangement and all the complications?" She met my eyes then, and I saw longing mixed with fear. "What if we can't? What if when the performance ends, there's nothing left?" The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. "Then at least we'll know for sure instead of wondering forever." Before she could respond, I kissed her. Not for photographs or witnesses or maintaining our cover, but because I'd fallen in love with her, despite every reason not to. The kiss changed everything. When we returned to the city, the professional distance was impossible to maintain. We would catch each other staring, find excuses to touch, stumble over words during conversations that used to flow easily. The sexual tension that had been building for months became impossible to ignore. One evening, after a particularly successful foundation fundraiser, we returned to the penthouse, and instead of retreating to our separate spaces, we opened a bottle of wine and sat on her couch talking about the evening's successes. "You were incredible tonight," she said, curled up beside me with her legs tucked under her. "The way you connected with those donors, the stories you told about the programs we're funding, you made them understand why this work matters." I was learning to accept her compliments without deflection. "We make a good team." She set down her wine glass and looked at me seriously. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something. This arrangement, this contract, it stopped being about the inheritance weeks ago. For me, at least." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean I would rather lose everything than keep pretending that what I feel for you is fake." Her confession was so unexpected that I couldn't speak for a moment. "The foundation, the inheritance, all of it. It matters, but not more than this. Not more than you." She reached for my hand. "I know the circumstances are impossible. I know the power dynamic is wrong. I know we started this as a business arrangement. But I'm in love with you, and I don't know how to go back to pretending I'm not." I set down my own wine glass and moved closer to her. "You don't have to go back. I'm in love with you, too." This time when we kissed, it wasn't tentative or questioning. It was acknowledgement of everything that had been building between us, everything we'd been trying to deny or rationalize or compartmentalize. We spent the night together, and in the morning, everything felt different. The contract still existed. The inheritance deadline was still approaching. Victor was still circling like a predator, but we were no longer pretending. We were no longer hiding from what we felt or what we wanted from each other. The final months of our arrangement took on a different quality once we'd acknowledged our real feelings. We were still performing for public consumption, but privately, we were building something authentic. Thea began talking about plans beyond the inheritance deadline, expanding the foundation's programs, traveling together, introducing me to extended family members as her actual girlfriend rather than a hired actress. I enrolled in the art therapy certification program for real and began volunteering with one of the foundation's community partners. We were creating a life together, not just maintaining a facade. But Victor wasn't finished with his attempts to undermine us. 2 weeks before Thea's 30th birthday, he made his final play. A private investigator he'd hired discovered our original contract, somehow obtaining copies of the financial arrangements and confidentiality agreements. The evidence was damning, proof that our relationship had begun as a paid performance, documentation of the $50,000, records of my background and financial desperation. Victor threatened to present this information to the Foundation's board and the media unless Thea agreed to step down from her leadership role immediately. The confrontation happened in the Foundation's boardroom, with Victor presenting his evidence like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "My cousin has been deceiving all of you," he announced to the assembled board members. "Her relationship is fraudulent, bought and paid for to satisfy the inheritance requirements. She hired a stranger to pretend to love her." The room erupted in shocked murmurs as he distributed copies of our original contract. I felt my face burning with humiliation as board members I'd grown to respect read the details of our arrangement. Thea sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, while Victor continued his presentation. "This is the person you want to trust with our family's legacy? Someone who lies so easily about something as fundamental as love?" He was enjoying the moment, savoring what he clearly saw as his victory. The inheritance requirements were meant to ensure stability and maturity. How can someone who hires fake relationships be considered either stable or mature? Several board members were already whispering among themselves, and I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. When Victor finished his presentation, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Thea, waiting for her response. She stood slowly, maintaining her composure despite the enormity of what had just been revealed. "Victor is correct about one thing," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Charlotte and I did enter into a contractual arrangement 6 months ago. I paid her $50,000 to pretend to be my girlfriend in order to satisfy the inheritance requirements." The admission sent another wave of murmurs through the room. I wanted to disappear, to flee from the embarrassment and judgment I saw on faces around the table. But Thea continued. "However, Victor's information is incomplete. He's failed to present the full story, which is that our fake relationship became real. Charlotte and I fell in love despite the circumstances that brought us together, not because of them." She looked directly at me as she spoke, her gaze steady and reassuring. "The woman sitting beside me is not an actress I hired. She's someone who transformed our foundation's approach to community engagement, who brought fresh perspectives and genuine passion to work that had become routine for those of us born into privilege." "That's a convenient narrative," Victor interrupted. "But how can anyone trust that your feelings are genuine when they originated from a financial transaction?" It was a fair question, and one that cut to the heart of my own insecurities about our relationship. But Thea's response surprised me with its honesty and vulnerability. "You can't trust it, Victor. None of you can. Love isn't something that can be proven or verified or documented in a contract. It requires faith and belief and the willingness to accept that two people can find something real, even in artificial circumstances." She turned to address the full board. "I won't stand here and defend the authenticity of my feelings because love doesn't work that way. What I will defend is Charlotte's contribution to this organization, her genuine commitment to our mission, and her right to be judged on her actions rather than her financial circumstances." The room was quiet as board members processed her words. "If you believe that accepting payment to perform a role disqualifies someone from genuine emotion, then you should vote to transfer the inheritance to Victor. But if you believe that people can grow, change, and find unexpected connections in unexpected places, then judge us on what we've accomplished together, not how we met." The board's deliberation lasted 3 hours. Charlotte and I waited in Thea's office, neither of us speaking much as we processed what had just happened. The humiliation of having our private arrangement exposed was overwhelming, but beneath it was relief at no longer having to hide the truth. "I'm sorry," Thea said suddenly. "I should have found another way to handle Victor's threats. I should have been honest from the beginning instead of putting you through this." I took her hand, intertwining our fingers the way we'd done so many times in public, but this time for comfort rather than performance. We both made choices that led us here. And honestly, I'm glad it's out in the open. I was tired of people thinking our relationship was something it wasn't. She squeezed my hand. "What do you think they'll decide?" I considered the question seriously. "I think they'll surprise us. Most of them have watched us work together for months. They've seen how we complement each other, how passionate we both are about the Foundation's mission. That has to count for something." When the board finally called us back into the room, their faces were unreadable. The chairman, an elderly woman who'd known Thea's grandfather personally, delivered their decision with formal gravity. "After careful consideration of all the information presented today, this board has reached a unanimous decision." The pause felt endless. "We find that while the circumstances surrounding Miss Blackwood's relationship with Miss Delacroix were unusual and initially deceptive, the work they have accomplished together over the past 6 months demonstrates a genuine partnership and shared commitment to our mission." Relief flooded through me, but she wasn't finished. "However, we cannot ignore the fact that this arrangement was conceived and executed in deliberate violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of the inheritance requirements. Therefore, we are implementing a probationary period. Miss Blackwood will assume full control of the foundation upon her 30th birthday as originally planned, but her leadership will be evaluated annually for the next 3 years. During this period, any evidence of further deception or mismanagement will result in immediate transfer of control to the secondary heir. Victor's face went red with fury. This is ridiculous. She hired a fake girlfriend, and you're rewarding her with exactly what she wanted. The chairman's response was ice cold. Mr. Blackwood, your behavior throughout this process has been vindictive and self-serving. You've shown more interest in destroying your cousin than in protecting our mission. That is not the kind of leadership this foundation needs. The meeting ended with Victor storming out, his final play having failed to achieve the victory he'd been certain was his. In the months that followed, Thea and I had to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than performance. It wasn't easy. We had to separate what was real from what had been contractual, learn to trust each other outside the artificial structure that had brought us together, and figure out how to be a genuine couple without the script we'd been following for so long. But we also had advantages that most couples didn't. We'd already weathered a crisis together, already proven we could work as partners under pressure, already seen each other at our most vulnerable, and chosen to stay. The foundation thrived under Thea's leadership, partly because she'd learned to value perspectives from outside her privileged background, partly because she'd found someone who challenged her to think differently about the impact of inherited wealth. We expanded the art therapy programs I'd researched, created new initiatives for community engagement, and developed partnerships with organizations I'd connected with during my volunteer work. Our fake relationship had become real, but more importantly, our shared vision for meaningful work had become the foundation of something lasting. 2 years after the board meeting that nearly ended everything, Thea proposed to me in the same boardroom where Victor had tried to destroy us. She'd arranged for the space to be filled with artwork created by children in our art therapy programs, along with letters from community partners describing the impact our work had made in their lives. I want to marry you in the place where we learned that love doesn't have to make sense to anyone except the people experiencing it, she said, getting down on one knee in front of the conference table where we'd once been judged and found worthy despite our imperfections. The ring was perfect, not ostentatious or showy, but beautiful in its simplicity, much like the relationship we'd built from the strangest possible beginning. I said yes through tears, not because she was wealthy or powerful, or because our marriage would secure her inheritance permanently, but because she'd seen potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself, because we'd found something real in the midst of performance, because love sometimes begins with the worst possible reasons and grows into the best possible truth. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.